Ed from Pro Parts Direct. Hey, does this look like your snowblower engine? Well, it probably is. And today, we're going to go through the insides of this engine so you get more familiar with your motor. So the first thing on your engine is what you're going to have is your sump cover, this back cover. There's usually a big gasket along the bottom of this cover right here. This cover, they typically will leak somewhere in the bottom here. So it's a very easy fix. You pulled off the motor, you undo the 4 bolts that hold the cover to the side of the motor, and you can replace this gasket. And as you can see, the back side of the engine, we like to look at some of the internals. What I'll do is I'll just kind of pull off the muffler here. But what you're looking at inside of the motor is your crankshaft, your camshaft, and your timing gear. Now, one of the common things that we see replaced on these engines is the camshaft. Now, this is your common Briggs & Stratton camshaft that we all hear about. It's one of the most common items that we replace here at Pro Parts Direct. So this camshaft on here has what they call the compression release valve. And you'll notice if you ever order a new one, that comes on it. But that compression relief valve is what helps you actually pull the engine over. It makes it a lot easier. And as you saw on the motor, what it does is it pushes up against your tappet valves, which are going to push up against your push rods and pushes up against your rocker arms. We'll be changing out that and changing out the gasket on this. This particular Briggs engine does not have a bearing, has a sleeve on the inside of the cover, but you do have an oil seal on the back side here. 99% of the time, if you're replacing this, you're going to replace this oil seal and you'll replace this gasket. Now, we'll put some links to the parts in the description, but that's a very common replacement item. While we're looking at the engine here, you're going to see this is your governor gear and then your governor timing gear. This is what matches up with the timing gear that sits on your crankshaft, then is also going to hit the actual governor gear that sits inside of here. As we look at the engine carburetor on the motor here, you're going to notice some long studs that get threaded into the block. Problem is, these days with the EPA, a lot of these are what they call fixed jet carburetor. Fixed jet carburetor means there's no screw on the bottom. There's no adjustments you can really make on this carburetor. So unfortunately, if it doesn't work, you have to replace it. Now you can get a carb kit and you can replace the float, you can replace the needles, but for the most part, there isn't much you can do with this carburetor. So you can clean it out and that's about it. We'll look at the fuel tank. Now the biggest thing that people don't realize with this fuel tank is the underside of this petcock actually goes inside the tank about a ½ an inch. So you can still have gas and the engine will cut off. Well, you need to add more gas because you don't have enough to get over the edge of that lip. It's a very common thing we see, particularly in the snow season. As we're kind of pulling the engine apart here, again, this is just more to familiarize yourself with what's going on in your motor. We can kind of pull off the head. Now, on a Briggs & Stratton, there's a lot of ways you can get this, and a lot of times guys will purchase this whole head because they don't want to deal with the rocker valves and the arms and all that jazz and resetting it. So a lot of times the guys will buy this whole head, which will include the head gasket. For the purpose of this, we'll kind of just show you so you can see what it looks like and how it goes together. This is your typical standard head. The head that comes from Briggs is going to come already with the rocker arms. It's going to come with the valve springs and the valves. Now you can tell this guy who was running this engine was not a good clean burning engine. But you're going to get that complete and installed just like this. So for the 99% of the time, you're just going to bolt the thing on, get ready to roll. Now as we look in here, if you ever pull your head off of the motor, get your locating pins. You don't ever want to lose these things because they're hard to get. This will help locate the head when you go to reinstall it. This is a very worn out gasket. So you can see he had a blown head gasket and it was running, but it delaminated the whole side of the gasket. But we just keep this for informational purposes. Your push rods are part of a kit that you can purchase. You do have an intake and exhaust. One's aluminum and one is steel. For your own knowledge, the aluminum one goes on the intake side. The steel one goes on the exhaust side. The steel one goes on the exhaust side because it can handle the heat that won't expand. This is your coil, solid state coil. This is what your spark plug will plug into. As the flywheel's turning, you can see it's going to come across this magnet, and that's what produces the electricity. So if we were to sit here and take off this flywheel, starter is actually connected to this and it allows this to turn over. Your flywheel produces a current that goes through the coil, which you get through your spark plug. Below this is your magnets, and this is your stator. This is what creates electricity to produce electricity for your lights, heated handlebars, any kind of accessory you might put on your snowblower. These never really ever go bad. These go bad typically, and you can go through some other videos out there and you'll see those videos, but what you're looking for when you put on your coil, because it's one item that does kind of wear out, is you can take a business card. There's about 30 thousandths gap that sits in between the coil and the flywheel. So you would adjust it properly. Clearly this is not adjusted properly. Again, it's so I can take the flywheel off and on. Purpose of the flywheel is as you use the electric start, this will push up, engage the flywheel, turn the flywheel, which will get the engine started. Common thing with this is typically over a couple of years, this flywheel key, now we see it typically more on the lawnmower, but this flywheel key will kind of shear. And even if it goes a little bit, it'll be hard starting or the engine won't move at all. But again, it's good that you see it, kind of see how everything works. You know, you probably don't tear down your snowblower engine very much. And again, this isn't a video designed to help you rebuild the engine, more of help locating where the parts are, giving you an idea how the basics of it work. Now, as we kind of keep going through the motor here, some things you can kind of see which will probably be a little harder to spot, but how the engine oils itself. And it uses a dipper on the bottom here. This dipper takes and flings the oil up into the inside of the case. It's kind of a good thing to point out too while we're here, is checking your oil level. This type of particular engine from Briggs is used on 4 or 5 different types of equipment. It could be a generator, snowblower, lawnmower. So there's different ways to check the oil. That's why you come and you see these drain plugs here and here. So if it was on a generator, they're more likely going to use these. It's on a snowblower, so you use your dipstick tube. You can see the dipstick goes all the way down in your crankcase. Now, if you were going to drain it, you could actually use this tube on the back to drain it. You put a bucket underneath. They also have the same ports on either side of the motor. So there's a few different ways. It depends on the application of the engine itself. These are your accessory wires. This is just a good basic overall tutorial of the motor. Again, this isn't designed to help you rebuild the engine, but if you wanted to know where parts are located, what they're called, what they do, this is certainly help out. If you have any further questions, certainly email us or contact us and we'll get right back to you.